Mark the birthday boy, how's your birthday going so far?
Technical issue. It's going all right. Nothing special. Very, very relaxing.
My
That's
goodness,
good.
he's a toddler already. Oh my goodness.
Oh, baby Aaron. Not such a baby anymore.
No.
He's turning 3 on Tuesday.
Happy almost birthday, Aaron.
What do you say? Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
It's fun that we've got to watch him grow up on screen.
Yeah.
Which
So how are we
days?
doing with time?
We are good, Frank, whenever you're ready.
Okay.
I'm gonna mute everyone, so Frank, you're gonna have to unmute yourself in a moment.
Okay. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Can you hear me?
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay. So we will start our service on page 4, and we'll have Rabbi Miriam Jerris help us welcome in the Shabbat. We gather on this Shabbat as a community of believers. We believe that Judaism is the entire experience of the Jewish people. We believe in the value of celebrating Jewish culture and identity. We believe that all those who choose to celebrate with us are part of our community. We believe that being together strengthens and enhances our humanistic Jewish experience. May this Sabbath be a time of peace and rejuvenation. This is a time of transition. We move from our everyday week to the experience of Shabbat. We turn from the concerns of the outside world and become quiet and peaceful. We, at this moment, this place, create a community of humanistic Jewish believers. Let us pause and take note as we begin the journey of this Shabbat. So we will continue with the service on page 5 and with our Nerot, with our lighting of candles. So if you have your candles ready, you can light them. And let's see. Sheila, would you like to lead us in the call and respond for the candle lighting?
I don't think there's a Sheila amongst us.
Oh, I thought I had it. Okay. Well, would somebody like to do the help me out with the candle lighting, do the call and respond?
Sure, I'll do it, Frank.
Okay, great.
We renew ourselves for the week ahead so that we will have strength for ourselves, our families, and our part in making the world a better place. We kindle the lights of Shabbat as symbols of human enlightenment and human compassion, to celebrate our coming together. To illuminate our lives and the warmth we find in our community, we remember the generations before us who lit candles as we do and who found beauty and serenity in their light.
Great. So let's say the blessing there together. Na'e ha'or ba'olam, na'e ha'or ba'adam, na'e ha'or ba'shabbat, nokir et or ha'shabbat. How wonderful is the light in the world. How wonderful is the light within humanity. How wonderful is the light of Shabbat. We cherish the light of Shabbat.
נאה האור בעולם, נאה האור השבת, נוקיר את אור השבת. איפה אורי, אורי בי, איפה תקוותי, תקוותי בי, איפה כוחי, כוחי בי, וגם בך, וגם בך, איפה כוחי, כוחי בי, וגם בך, וגם בך. Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you, and in you.
Thank you. So we will continue with the values of secular humanistic Judaism. Now, I'm new here, as a lot of you might know. So if things get a little screwed up, I don't really know you. So if I ask you to read and you don't want to read or whatever, you can do whatever you want to. But I would like to ask Jessica if she would like to help us out on page 9 with the values of Judaism. We'll do a call and respond.
Let's see if I can read it.
Okay.
I see page 11. Oh, that's page 2. All right. Where do you want me to start?
Page 9.
I don't see 9. Wait a minute. Okay, good.
Okay, and it starts with Judaism. So you
Sure.
read that and then we'll
Okay.
do the italics.
I
Okay.
got it. Judaism is far more than many people allow it to be. Some people view it very narrowly, seeing only its religious side. Others perceive it broadly, emphasizing its ethical outreach.
Judaism is more than theology and moral rules. It is more than parochial faith and universal sentiments. It is a living culture of a living people.
Judaism is family, love, and nurturing. Judaism is memory, roots, and pride. Judaism is music, dance, and humor. Everything the Jewish people throughout the ages did and yearned to do is Judaism.
Judaism did not fall from heaven. It was not invented by a divine spokesman. It was created by the Jewish people. It was molded by Jewish experience. It was flavored by Jewish sadness and Jewish joy.
Life is an evolution, a continuous flow of transformations. And so is culture. When circumstances change, people change. When people change, their laws and customs change. A healthy people welcomes change. It understands its history. It knows its own power. It leads the past into the future.
Secular humanistic Jews affirm the power of people. We affirm the power of common sense and human reason. But above all, we strive for human dignity. Human dignity is Jewish dignity. So we'll continue with our next musical selection, which is on TED.
Great. We're going to do Hine Matov. Beautiful. Okay. Hine Matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine
Thank you. So, we'll continue with our sharing of joys, concerns, and sorrows. So if anyone has anything they want to say, you can put your hand up in chat.
Yes, Carol. Oh, you're muted, Carol.
Got it. Okay. I've made my move. I've moved to Queens. I'm starting to get to know Queens. It's a whole different place. I'm in Richmond Hill, and I have a neighborhood, Lefferts Boulevard, Metropolitan Avenue, for those who know anything about Queens. I can walk to Forest Park, and so I've started my new adventure.
Thank you.
Congratulations and good luck.
Yes.
Thank
Sonia, I saw that your hand was up.
Oh, I realize I think I raised my hand for the wrong section. It's for someone who's ill. So
Oh,
I'll
okay,
talk later. Sorry.
Rachel and Titus?
No, we were just appreciating the what Carol said. So,
Okay.
Carol, congratulations on your move.
Gail, I saw your hand up. Was that also congratulations? Okay.
I guess it's also a different lifestyle, isn't it, Carol?
Oh, Carol, you muted.
Okay. Yes, it's very, very different and hard, not that easy to get used to. It's a journey.
Okay.
And I'm only there 2 weeks, so
Okay.
you have to, I'm told you have to give yourself 6 months. So this is just, a step-by-step.
Well, you look terrific. Did you have your surgery yet?
No, January.
Okay.
I didn't want to pile myself up with everything at once.
Mhm.
I'll have my hip replacement in January.
Okay. Well, we'll follow up on that. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else?
Mark's here. I'd like to wish him a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Mark.
Yes. Yes. Shall we sing to him?
I don't know if we can coordinate that at this moment. I think maybe that's better left for the after schmooze.
Yeah, the schmooze.
Okay. But we can't
Sure.
let his birthday go by without having the birthday song.
We
Thank
will.
you for the birthday wishes.
Great. Okay, so if we are done with the soul section, we're going to move on, and we are going to talk about a little portion of the Torah. A couple of weeks ago, we had started with Dan Wyman, and he did a little discussion about the current Torah portion, and we thought it might be kind of interesting and nice for us to talk about the Torah in a humanistic way. So this week we have Peter is going to do a little discussion of Chayei Sarah, which is the portion for this week. And take it away, Peter.
Okay. Am I on? Okay.
You're on.
Okay. Shalom, everyone. Good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for the introduction, Frank. Last time we met, which was in person, and as Frank indicated, Dan Wyman reflected on the Parsha Lech Lecha, and we met Abraham and Sarah, which was my great-grandmother's name, as a matter of fact, so this is very in keeping. And now we continue with the significant people of the Torah. Tonight, we examine Chaya Sarah, Life of Sarah. The portion is traditionally read on Shabbos morning. We do it on a Friday night. That's when we meet, and that's what we'll be doing with this secular Devar Torah project for hopefully weeks and months to come. This story begins with Abraham mourning Sarah's death at age 127 and seeking a burial place for her. At the same time, Abraham was searching for a wife for his son, Isaac. The other son was Ishmael. Even though the Parsha is called Life of Sarah, it really isn't but Abraham without Sarah coping with his grief. Concurrently, he was also focusing on finding a wife for his son Isaac, and that was Rebekah. That itself is another story. This Parsha emphasizes themes of loss, change, uncertainty, and creating a structure and of maintaining life. Allow me to explore this word chai, life, for a moment. With this Parsha's title, Chaya, we know from the root word chai, mainly, many of us use it in toast, l'chaim, to life. You may remember that Fiddler on the Roof song. So we have chai, life, Eitz Chaim, tree of life, Bet Chaim, a cemetery, but it really means a house of life, and other uses throughout the Jewish calendar. Sarah died, as I mentioned, 127 years of age, and Abraham lived 175. Moses lived 120 years, hence the phrase, may you live to 120 years, mit 120 Jahren, a good life as Moses. Now, Abraham, even at an advanced age, had to deal, like a lot of us, with a devastating loss. That's his wife, Sarah, and with the help of friends to comfort him. Abraham probably had friends and family to sustain him and to encourage him to keep himself busy and focus on life. Es ist schwer, it's not easy. Yet he found a wife for Isaac, and her name is Rebekah. However, while a certain part of the Parsha, which is the little selection of Torah, which I'm doing, however, the Parsha concentrates on Isaac, other thoughts too are raised in the reading as who we meet, where, how, can something become of it? As could this person become a friend or your beshert, the intended one? Now, upon reflection, we do need each other, correction, especially after a death, and also in these worrisome times to help and keep each other sane and healthy in a crazy world. Remember the line from The Godfather, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer? Well, we don't want enemies, but it's important to keep our friends, even family, close and closer. When people are mourning, contact can be in the form of a call, being taken out for dinner, or just offering attention. One question is, after loss, be it a friend, sibling, parent, or wife, is on how to go on. Is it patience and fortitude, like the lions in front of the New York Public Library? I don't know which one's on the left and which is on the right, but you can always ask the librarian. And also maintaining strength, whether we have it or not. After my wife Renee died in 2018 and was devoted to the city congregation, friends detected a certain something in me about when and if I will get back on the horse, or have I dusted myself off and started all over again? Well, what else could I do? I had to go on, live. The word life, chai, push on. We never forget the losses, but appreciate those around us, not quite filling that gap, but realizing it's a neue Welt, a new world without a loved one. Now, permit me another moment on loss, which I reflected in my hope discussion on Rosh Hashanah. It seems I still have more in my tank on this than I realized, so please forgive me on Shildikmir. I felt the power of having experienced the loss of a loved one and deciding how to honor her life, and conclude with a final act as per her instructions. Renee wanted to be cremated. I respected her wishes, but at the service I wanted a plain pine box, an element of tradition, but it was covered with a quilt she made for my nephew Isaiah when he was at West Point at the time. He has that quilt back again. That certain touch or connection with the past, the pine box. And it's in a similar vein like Abraham giving Sarah a burial place. I still think it would have been helpful to have a grave, an honored location like Sarah, to have a headstone to visit or talk to rather than a box of ashes in the apartment. Admittedly, I'm still not sure, but this is what I wrestle with years later. As I reread the Parsha prior to working on it, I realized I had not totally understood this section as a 12-year-old going on 13 at the time preparing for my bar mitzvah. The rabbi edited the text a lot, and I still have that booklet with all the complete edits and trope markings, which, here it is, behind me here. I can't see myself on camera, but I hope you can see it, and I can share it another time. I always thought the heavy editing of my portion was because of sex. At Abraham's age, concubines, oh my. Well, you can look that up on your own. The bar mitzvah was on November 17th, 1973. It was on my birthday. Yeah, I lost out to 2 sets of presents. I didn't receive one fountain pen. Or a wallet. I didn't even make a speech or was asked. I don't recall what Rabbi Spivak said. Does this Devar make up our 51 years later? Well, we'll see. So on this point, is this all a meditation on life and death of our existence? Perhaps we should call this Parsha of Chaya Sarah, Chaya us, the life of us, as we all go through the ups and downs, joys and joys of being, such as meeting new people, losing old friends, and maintaining family relationships, adjusting, adapting. It ain't easy. But, hey, that's life. Chai. On December 6th, we'll have another secular Devar Torah given by Gail Nadler. We hope to continue using the Torah only as a resource for reflection, commentary, and motivation to communicate ideas. At this time, I'd like to thank the Devar Committee, which is Gail Nadler, Howard Alper, and Dan Wyman. And we offer this to everyone listening and being in person in future times. If they want to deliver a Devar Torah in the future, please contact any of us and we'll be glad to help you. And with that, I thank you very much. Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. And now I return you back to Rabbi Frank Tamburello.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. It's interesting that we spoke about Abraham and Sarah, and I don't really want to go into it tonight because we don't really have the time. But according to the Talmud, actually, one of the reasons why, and this week we celebrated the Transgender Memorial Day. One of the reasons why they didn't have children until they were so old is because they were actually intersexed. So if you want to, Peter, if you want to investigate that a little bit, it's kind of fascinating. Sarah was considered alonit by some of the Talmudic rabbis. So that's a whole interesting thing too. But we'll continue now with our reading. And on page 11, we're going to read Robert Silverstein. And in our hectic, fast-paced, consumer-driven society, it is common to feel overwhelmed, isolated, and alone. The sense of belonging we feel when we make the time to take an active role in our communities can give us a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. And Peter spoke so well about that just now. But I would say that when we are experiencing a great deal of fear or anxiety, it is easy to feel alone in its most profound sense. That is why being in a community is so important. Sure, it is great to have a circle of friends that we can entertain ourselves with, but the true community is something more profound than that. When we are in fellowship with people who share our values, they affirm a part of who we are, and that is a good thing. Sure, it can go too far, and we can live in a bubble of sameness when taken to extremes. But in any event, we do have this hunger to be connected with those in whom we can feel a warmth and infinity on a deep level. For that reason, the city congregation is special because here we are a community of hope and joy living in the midst of fear. Between the uncertainty of the economy, the crazy political events, it is all too easy to feel alone, to feel afraid, to have concerns about the future that might spill over into anxiety and possibly even paranoia. But like a bulwark against a storm, our humanistic Jewish communities around the nation and around the world affirm the Jewish values of justice and shalom. We live these values and we affirm that in our struggle to make tikkun olam, repairing the world a reality, we can proclaim hope in times of fear, not only for Jews, but for all people. Rabbi Hillel said, "Do not separate yourselves from the community." How lucky we are to be part of such a community where we can be absolutely true to the values of our ancestors, where we are not concerned with litmus tests and magical formulas to affirm our Jewish identity, where we can rely on each other to help deal with our fears and anxieties in a clear, logical, and rational way, and where we can take ownership of our own Judaism and Jewish traditions and use them in ways that make the most sense to us. So I would like at this time to, okay, so this is what happened. There was more to the speech, but Michael, when he printed it out on his computer went bluey, and I only have a half of the rest of my little speech. So I'm going to end it there. I think I have said enough, and we will continue with our service.
Okay, so our next song, unless we're skipping the musical selection. No? Good. Okay, so our next song is going to be What a Wonderful World, which I felt was appropriate with Thanksgiving coming on next week. So I'll wait for the lyrics to be shared before I begin so everyone could sing along.
Oh, I don't think the lyrics for that. Sorry.
No worries. I'm sure we're familiar.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll just go for it then. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies crying, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let us continue on page 28 with our Mishaberak for Refuah Shlema. Any names for that we want to kind of remember for healing? We're on page 28. In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we now turn our minds and hearts toward those who need our love, who are ill, who are lonely, who suffer pain, or who have been wronged. So do we have any special people that we would like to mention?
Jillian?
Thursday, Thanksgiving is also my late mom's birthday. So I'm going to be remembering her, missing her, wishing she was having tofurkey with me. And I'll be honest, also in a way, because her politics were so different than mine, a bit relieved that I don't have to hear her rant about the election, but missing her and loving her just the same. So just wanted to put that out there.
Sunny?
My mother, Diane Lickman, she had a trip and fall on the sidewalk and luckily didn't break any major bones, which is always a big concern at her age, but she broke her tooth and her lip had to get stitches. She's a little bruised up, but she's otherwise okay, luckily. And my Uncle Greg-in-law, who had a motorcycle accident this past week and is in the hospital recovering.
Does anyone else have anyone they want to mention? Faith?
My brother, Dennis, he's been in a nursing home with complications and his care plan not being followed due to COVID outbreaks, and it's kind of complicated, but I just want him to be well and to go home. He's been there more than he needs to be.
Okay, so let's continue with the Refuah Shlema.
The source of strength that dwells so deep within us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Shalom. Makom hakoach b'tochenu, מקורות הברכה מחברותינו, be those in need of healing, the refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us sing Shalom.
Thank you. So we will continue on page 29 with the memorial. Let us proclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us each in our own way take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind in ourselves and others. And let us say, Yehu Yehi, May it be so. And before we start the recitation of names, I would like, Rebecca, I have to tell you that this week is my father's yahrzeit, and his absolute favorite song was "Wonderful World," and it was not coordinated that you sing it, but it was like amazing that showed up tonight. So I want to thank you for that. So I would like to ask for, are there any names for yahrzeit? Actually, it could be any name you want to say. It doesn't have to actually be yahrzeit. If you want to say someone special, you may. Yes.
Rich?
My grandmother, Gertrude Silverman's yahrzeit is this past week.
Sybil?
My brother-in-law, Miles Adler, his second yahrzeit is this Sunday.
Faith?
My former husband, Robert Schwartz, longtime member of B'nai Jeshurun. I didn't formally announce do his yahrzeit this year, so I'd like to do that here. I've been away from Jewish ritual for a while.
Carol?
My brother, James Melman. I think it's year 2.
I'm thinking of my brother Bill. His birthday was on the 13th, and he would have been 37.
No. Thank you.
Does anyone else have anyone that they're remembering?
Okay, so Rebecca will continue with Zecher Sadiq on page 31.
What? Oh, I will just keep going. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. With our tears and our sorrow, we remember. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. With our courage and our strength, we do not forget. Acts of kindness, deeds of courage will remain. Death cannot take that which is locked in our hearts. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of good people bless our days. Zecher Tzadik Livracha.
Thank you. So we will continue with our service on page 32 with the Kiddush. And so we have our Peter, do you recognize this wine glass? I bought this at your museum store, and this Kiddush glass, it was special because it was a replica of a glass that was smuggled out of Germany by Holocaust survivors, and it was originally red, I think. But now they made copies of it, and I bought it years ago in your store. So let's continue with the Kiddush on page 32 with the wine. Would somebody like to read that? Yes, Carol, read it. You have to unmute yourself.
Losing that mute sign, I don't know why.
We are, okay, now, again, okay.
You're good.
We celebrate.
Carol is,
I lost it again. I lost the page. Oh, there it is. We celebrate technology. We celebrate the fruit of the vine and nature's gifts. As we bend nature to our pleasure, we also think about our duties as caretakers of this planet. We dedicate this wine to the joy of Shabbat, to the lives of generations past and generations to come, and to the planet that sustains us.
So let us say it together.
Naim
Hakayim.
Hayim Bolam. Naim Hachienu Banu. Naim Gahadle Prihagafen Lakayim. We celebrate the life within the world. We celebrate the life within us. We cherish those who grow and tend the fruit of the vine. L'chaim, to life.
Perfect. And let's sing our blessing.
Sure. Naim hachayim ba'olam, naim hachayim ba'anu, naim migale pri hagafen
L'chaim. Now, our challah. Do you know what makes bread challah? Does anybody know what makes bread challah? No?
Is it the egg?
When challah is made, it's not the egg. It doesn't have, it could be, challah could be any kind of matzah is challah. And what that means is when challah represents the temple offering. And so when the dough is prepared for the challah, they have to take a little knob of the dough and put it in the oven and burn it. And then they make the bread out of the rest of the dough. So as long as that's done, you have challah. Conversely, if you go to Stop and Shop and buy a challah, they call it challah, but it might not be challah at all, according to Jewish ritual. But everyone thinks it's the braided bread. It doesn't have to be braided at all. In Iran, it looks like a regular round loaf of bread. And of course, for Passover, you'll see if you look on the box of matzah, it'll say challah is taken. So that means that when they prepared that matzah, they did that. They took the little piece of the dough and they threw it in the oven. So that's your little challah lesson for today. So let's go on. And
what is the purpose of the burning? What does that signify?
The challah, what does it mean?
I mean, what is the burning of the little piece of dough?
The challah, it represents the burnt offerings. So actually, the word Holocaust means burnt offerings. And so when the priest would prepare for their services in the temple, they would slaughter animals and they would burn some of them, and so that was the idea. So when the temple was destroyed, there's no more temple offering, there's no more sacrifice. So what the rabbis did was, instead of having that animal sacrifice, they made it into something that was more common and that could be done all the time, and that was baking of bread. That was the most important thing. So whenever they made bread, they would, and it was for the ritual use of like Shabbat, they would do that, burn that little piece of dough. And if you go to if you could get a challah from any company that says it's Jewish challah, you have to look on it and it will say that challah is taken. But what happens is we think that challah means a braided egg bread. It's, that's a tradition that it's a braided egg bread, but it doesn't have to be that at all. It could be any kind of bread. As long as it has that dough taken out and burned, it's considered challah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So let's read the little blurb for challah, breaking bread. Would someone like to read that?
Oh, I will.
Okay.
Okay, challah. Breaking bread together is an ancient custom in many cultures. It signifies sharing, fellowship, and coming together in peace. We reenact this ritual together as a sign of our common humanity, our care for one another, and for those less fortunate than ourselves. Let us say together, okay? Naim matanat hamazon, nai amal kaltenu, nai lechem haaretz, b'tei avon.
Beautiful. And then in English?
How wonderful is the gift of food. How wonderful is the work of our hands. How wonderful is the bread of the earth. We cherish those who bring forth bread from the earth.
And then our blessing.
Nae matnat hamazon, nae amal kapenu, nae lechem haaretz, b'tei avon.
Wow, I didn't realize that our congregation spoke Hebrew so well. I'm very impressed. Thank you. And before I turn the service over to Peter to introduce our speaker, we'll continue on page 36. We'll finish up with our concluding thoughts and our last song. Someone would like to read the concluding thoughts?
I will. Sybil?
Okay.
Each of us is here for a temporary stay on earth. For what purpose, I don't know. But it is plain that we exist for our fellow humans. In the first place, for those upon whose smiles and welfare our happiness depends. And the next for those unknown to us personally, but to whose destinies we are bound by the tie of sympathy. 100 times a day, I remind myself that my inner and outer life depends on the labor of others, living and dead, that I must exert myself in order to give in the measure as I have received and am still receiving. Albert Einstein.
Well, beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, and for one final song, we're gonna do Na'aseh Shalom, which is up, so I'll just go right into it. Na'aseh Shalom ba'olam, Na'aseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'emru shalom. Na'aseh Shalom ba'olam, Na'aseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'emru shalom. Na'aseh Shalom, Na'aseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Na'aseh Shalom, Na'aseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Na'aseh Shalom, Na'aseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Na'aseh Shalom, Na'aseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, before we continue, there are some announcements. The rabbis' classes will continue each week while Rabbi Tzema is on sabbatical. Every other Wednesday is his introduction to Judaism, which is at 7:15. Every Tuesday and Thursday, reading the Bible, reading biblical stories through humanist eyes is at 10:30 in the morning. Monday nights is Talmud for secular Jews at 7 p.m. Every Wednesday evening is our weekly Zoom schmooze from 8 to 10. All are welcome. The first Sunday of every month is our online grief support group. All are welcome. The next Kids School is December 8th at 3 p.m. The Kids School Hanukkah celebration is December 15th. The next Shabbat is December 6th, commemorating International Day of Persons with Disabilities Day. Hanukkah Shabbat is on December 20th at Tridim Shanghai West on the Upper West Side. It is a restaurant celebration that we'll be having. We'll be doing a cash raffle, a trivia, and a light service. So please, all are welcome. Come, make your reservations with us. Announcements will be going out for that soon. You have to RSVP in order to save a spot. TCC will be paying for this, so you are welcome to come and just enjoy yourself. There will be a pre-selected menu that we will have. Yeah, those are our announcements for the rest of the year. And now over to Peter to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, as they say in network television. I want to make sure, Rebecca, are you here with us?
Hi, Peter, I am, but my video cannot turn on. It says the host has stopped my video sharing.
Okay, we'll have technical folks work with that, Shauna and Kathy, correct?
Yes, we'll work on
Okay,
that.
so while they're doing that, I will vamp with an introduction. There you are. Look at that Punim. Okay, everyone, for Punim's here. So Rebecca Claren has been writing about the American West for 25 years, maybe more by this time. Her journalism, for which she has won the Hillman Prize and 10 grants from the Fund for Investigative Journalism, has appeared in such publications as High Country News, The Nation, and Indian Country Today. Her debut novel, Kickdown, was shortlisted for the Penn Bellwether Prize. She lives in a great city, Portland, Oregon, with her husband and 2 children. And now tonight, we're going to explore her book, The Cost of Free Land, Jews, Lakota, and American Inheritance. So Rebecca, welcome, welcome, welcome. You and I, just to give before I bring you on, sorry for that little pre-tip off. A quick note how I came to discover the book. A friend of mine named Maxine, working at the New York Historical Society museum shop, alerted me to this book almost 2 years ago, or at least when it came out. I instantly got the book and read it, realizing the compelling story of a family's history and a relationship about indigenous people and the U.S. government. Horrible treatment. This is not a spoiler alert. Then, upon support from the Shabbat Committee, I contacted Rebecca, and we've been in touch for almost a year or more, I guess, to be able to present her to you tonight, especially right before Thanksgiving. After the talk, there'll be a Q&A. I'll be moderating the questions. So raise your hand, use the chat function. And this book is available at all various outlets, including independent booksellers, which we'll be posting during our talk. So please welcome our guest tonight, live from Portland, Oregon, Rebecca Claren. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I was under the impression that I would be starting about a half an hour ago, and Peter and I had gone back and forth about that. And I'm sorry. I will have a hard out in half an hour. My Shabbat dinner with my family starts at 9 o'clock your time, at 6 o'clock mine. But we will use our time wisely and as well as we can. And what beautiful services I've been sitting in listening to, and what a sweet congregation you seem to have. This book, The Cost of Free Land, it started with 3 questions. What are the stories we tell? What are the stories we don't tell? And why don't we tell certain stories? I grew up hearing amazing stories about my ancestors who were Jewish homesteaders on the South Dakota prairie. And there were these stories that I like to think of as our greatest hits. There was the one about my Uncle Louis who could stand on the back of a horse, or my cousin who, I don't know that I believe this story entirely, but the way the story goes, he would clear a path every morning from the family shack out to the outhouse of rattlesnakes when he was only 5 years old. And then the story that is the most popular, the one the women in my family especially love to tell, is the story of my great-great-grandmother, Fagetka, who in the winter in South Dakota, so it was very, very cold, it could be like -40, she would send her daughters, one of whom was my great-grandmother, who I'm named after, outside armed with a stick or a piece of wood, and she would tell them to crack the ice of the creek that ran behind the house, and then she would dunk herself in this freezing water. This was her mikvah. And yet, for all the stories that we told and tell about these beloved relatives, there were no stories about my family's Lakota neighbors. The nearest reservation was only 13 miles away from the northern edge of my family's ranch, a ranch that would ultimately become about 5,000 to 6,000 acres. And that's instructive, I think, that there were no stories about their Lakota neighbors, because, of course, both the stories we tell and the stories we don't create the myth of ourselves that we pass to future generations. I've been a reporter writing about the American West, as Peter said, for about 25 years. And I've really thought that my job description is, how do you take seemingly very boring federal policies and laws and show how they play out in the lives of individual people and families and communities in ways that are anything but boring? And yet, when it came to my own family's history, my own family story on the South Dakota Prairie, I maintained a blind spot for a very long time. In some ways, this is because I think the way we learn about American history, I went to an excellent school. I was very, very fortunate. I had excellent schooling. I went to a great school in Seattle where I grew up. I went to Smith College on the East Coast for college. And yet I never learned really anything about the intersection of immigrants and Native Americans. This book is by no means meant to be a definitive history of the Lakota Nation. It's really not meant to be a definitive history of Jewish immigrants even, but instead it's supposed to be the idea of a definitive history of these entangled histories, as I call them. How do these stories push and pull one another? Because if we learn these histories in silos, the history of Native Americans, the history of immigrant Americans, you miss the depth of the injustice. You miss the depth of how the United States very clearly wrote policies and laws that were intended to hurt some people and benefit others. I wanted to write a very wide and deep story. And so because of that, this book doesn't start on the South Dakota Prairie. It actually opens in Russia, in a little town. Well, my family was from a little town in Kapulia, but it actually opens in Odessa. And I'd like to read to you a little bit from that section of the book. Thanks so much for listening. To understand how a Jewish community ended up settling on Lakota land, we must begin in Odessa in the spring of 1881, when my great-great-grandfather, Harry Sinekin, was around 19 years old. It was unseasonably hot. In fields outside the city, crops were wilting. An economic downturn had left thousands of factory workers unemployed. People were hungry. A dry wind blew incessantly, raising dust and dirt that fell from the sky like ash. Months earlier, terrorists had assassinated the Russian Tsar Alexander II. Rumors boiled in the streets and the countryside blaming Jews. Though unfounded, the accusations flourished. Jews had long been reviled as different, as Christ killers. In early May, as out-of-work men spilled from taverns, they formed a mob and stormed the streets looking for Jews. Some later reported hearing the chants from blocks away, "The Jews drink our blood." Harry Sinekin, drawing on the survival instincts that would serve him well on the South Dakota Prairie 2 decades later, dove under his bed as soon as he heard the angry rioters. If he was armed at all, it was at best with a kitchen knife, as it was illegal for Jews to own guns. Harry heard men yelling. He heard the windows shattering. He heard the door crash to the ground. The mob smashed every mirror in the house. They broke all their furniture, and then Harry felt the heavy wooden bed frame crash onto his face. His nose broke, blood was everywhere. The peasants or the soldiers, whoever they were, found him. They beat him. They broke every one of his ribs, set fire to the house, and left him for dead. The looting of Jewish shops and homes and the attacks on Jewish people continued in Odessa for 6 days. Such violence towards Jews was so common, so systemic in Eastern Europe that it had a name, pogrom, which comes from a Russian word that means both to destroy and to conquer. Somehow, Harry survived and escaped the burning house. For the rest of his life, he would suffer from the effects of the beating and smoke inhalation. Even so, he was lucky to be alive. This is an immigrant story. Like all immigrant stories of survival, of leaving the known world to flee to a new place, it begins with fear and relies on luck. My family's stories about Harry have always followed a classic script. We highlight his pluck and how he overcame adversity on the road to opportunity. We fail to acknowledge the reverberations of our family's good fortune, or the fact that it came at the expense of others. So, life for my family in Kapulia, this little shtetl in what is today near Minsk in Belarus, is where Harry returned to, where his mother had been living after this terrible beating. And long story short, he gets married, he has 6 children, but life for my relatives, as I'm guessing for some of yours as well, was very difficult in the shtetl. There was always threat of violence, and there were terrible economic conditions. Jews were not allowed to own land. And so when there is opportunity to go to the United States, Harry and his brothers take it. And they come to not New York, unlike so many other Jews. We did have some relatives living here, but very quickly, Harry's younger brother takes the rail line as far as it would go, which was at the time Sioux City, Iowa. There were so many Jews living in Sioux City from Kapulia, that this tiny shtetl, but there were so many Jews already in Sioux City, there was a synagogue called the Anshe Kapulia Shul. And at some point, Harry and his brothers see a broadside, or they see a notice in the paper, or they hear the news that there is free land on offer. So it's not even for sale, free land, 160 acres that is theirs to keep if they can do what's called proving up. And this was on offer from the United States. To prove up meant that you improved upon the land. You put a structure on the land and you farmed it. You made the land productive. We now know, of course, that the native prairie intact is one of our best defenses combating climate change and capturing carbon emissions. But for the early white explorers who came to the Great Plains, they wrote back to Congress that this was a great desert. And with that information in mind, the United States signed treaties with many Plains nations, native nations, promising and reserving that this would be their land in perpetuity. But when the railroad company decides it wants to put a railroad line linking California to the rest of the country, both Congress and the railroads understand that just the cost of that long haul traffic to get all those oranges from California to New York City is not going to cover the cost of building that rail line. What they are going to need are lots of little communities along the way who will need to bring in dry goods, ship out their cattle, and so promises made become promises broken. And the United States breaks the treaty that it had signed with the Lakota over and over again. So that by 1908, when my family are planting their first crop on the South Dakota prairie, in an area that to this day, locals still call Jew Flats, even though no Jew has lived there for quite a long time, the Lakota, their Lakota neighbors, are living on just 2% of the land that they had reserved would be theirs forever, less than 60 years earlier. My family gets great benefit from this land, and they get benefit in many ways. There's this huge psychological impact for them. The Sinikins was their name, and they have 6 children, Harry and Fagetka, and almost all of the kids become homesteaders. They tell their children that owning land helped them feel more free, made them feel like real Americans. And there has been historical work that has demonstrated that for Jews who engaged in the homesteading experiment, there were at least about 1,000 Jewish homesteaders in the Dakotas alone, which, by the way, is only about 0.5% of all homesteaders in the area in that time, in those states. But for those Jews, even those Jews who failed at the homesteading experiment, who didn't prove up, who didn't get to keep their land, it was very valuable for them. It made them, one historian said, it made them shake off their suspect immigrant status. It also gave them great chance to assimilate, which my family really wanted to do. And they get to go to school. Boys and girls are going to school. They're going to school with Jews and non-Jews alike. But the other thing that was maybe the biggest impact for my family is that their ranch, their land becomes like an ATM machine. I have been trained as an investigative reporter, and I had so many stories from my family, and we don't throw anything away in my family. So I literally had thousands and thousands of pages of letters and day diaries and photographs. I had tax returns from 1911. I had documentation from the federal government, and yet I didn't have anything in all of that resembling a fact. And so with the help of a historian in the Dakotas, she and I went into the deeds office and we pulled the deeds on every piece of land my family owned. And then we pulled the mortgages on that land. And what my family was doing was what everyone was doing that was non-native on the Great Plains and beyond. They were taking out relatively small amounts of land in the form of mortgages on the value of the property they owned. But then they used that money to start new businesses. My family becomes very big in the saloon business in the Black Hills. They buy more land, or they take out a mortgage and they move away. They keep their land, but they move to cities where their children will have better opportunity. I wanted to see the value of that land. So I added up all that number, adjusted for all of those mortgages and adjusted for inflation. All of that came to $1.1 million. And I think it's important to mention here that there are something like 25% of American adults today who descend from homesteaders. There's maybe as many as 90 million Americans. Very, very few of those people, those of us, are people of color, are Black or Native. There's a wonderful sociologist out of Brandeis whose last name is Shapiro, and he wrote a book about wealth in America. And he said, if you are descended from homesteaders and you can send your kids to college, or you can buy a home, it's very likely you can do that because of the intergenerational wealth accumulated by that homestead. Homesteading has been called the biggest single piece of affirmative action for white people our country ever passed. And yet all of that benefit that's coming to my family and to other homesteaders, none of that is coming to the Lakota living on reservations. And in fact, not only does the United States take land to further try and diminish Lakota connection to land, the United States makes Lakota religion and ritual illegal. I found old jail files from the early 1900s and late 1900s of the reservations right around where my family's living, and people were being arrested for just practicing their rituals, for doing things like getting divorced, something my ancestors were doing just a few miles away. You know, at no point is anyone saying to my ancestors, you must stop speaking Yiddish. You have to change your last name. You have to stop braiding challah if you want to keep your land here in America. But that's exactly what is being asked of their Lakota neighbors. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking things that was done to the Lakota in an effort to break this connection to land and assimilate Native people was that, as you all know, Native children were, by federal law, forced to be sent to boarding schools intentionally very far away from their families. And as many of you may know, the first time that any official ever apologized for this was just a few weeks ago, President Biden made an official apology. But there were boarding schools. There was Native children were being expected to be sent to boarding schools until the 1970s. This history is not very far away. I want to keep an eye on our time, and I want to make sure I have time for your questions. But before I read the last section of the book, there's a couple of very important things I need to explain. So even though I didn't grow up with any stories of my family's Lakota neighbors, I grew up with these mysterious photographs of my ancestors shaking hands with men dressed in Lakota and Dakota regalia. And no one knew anything about these photographs. And on my first trip to do research for this book, several different tribal historians at different reservations pointed to one of the photos, and we said, we think the man in this picture with your great Uncle Jack, great Uncle Jack, is Joseph White Bull. Joseph White Bull was a really famous guy. His uncle was Sitting Bull. There was a whole book written about Joseph White Bull in the 30s called Warpath. And through sources of mine, I was introduced to his descendant, Doug White Bull, who, when I met him, he said to me, I met him in elder housing on Standing Rock. And he said, I am the oldest living descendant of the man in that photograph with your ancestor. And knowing Doug has really changed my life. And the book is really told in the entangled and specific stories of my ancestors and the White Bull family. And the book toggles back and forth between the stories of these two families and then deeply grounded in a much wider American history, so that you understand the structure that was in which these stories were contained and being written.
Rebecca, you wanted also to remind you, this is Peter, to remind you of some updating things. I didn't want to let that go.
Oh, maybe we can talk about that later. Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Just to remember where I was. There was this indigenous judge, Abby Abenanti, who's from Northern California, who I came to know while working on some reporting before I was working on this book. And I worked, and then she continued to be a mentor to me while working on this project. And I had spent a lot of time thinking, what did my ancestors know about what was going on with their Lakota neighbors? What did they know? What does it mean to have been a victim only to become part of the system in which they were then a victimizer? And Judge Abby said to me, everyone knew what was happening to Indians. And then in the next breath, and she's a very compassionate person, she said, but when you're running for your life in terror, which is really what your family was doing when they were coming to America, you're not stopping to have a quick restorative justice conversation along the way. She said it's going to take a number of generations to not grow up with what we today call trauma and the inherited trauma of what your family experienced, to step into this history. She said that's why it's appropriate that it's your generation, your cousins, your brother who is facing this. And then she said another thing that was really important to me. She said, if you're going to look at these histories, you need to think about how to respond. You should grapple with them. And we know that justice works best when done in a cultural context. She told me, you should study the Jews. What do the Jews say about how to respond to a harm, even one you may not have directly committed, but one you benefited from? And so for a few years, my rabbi and I here in Portland, Oregon, Benjamin Barnett, we did have Ruta, a traditional form of Jewish study in pairs, and we studied the Torah and the Talmud for direction on how to do repair around such a thing as the taking of native land. And I don't include everything we studied in this book, but it is the pieces of those texts that helped me the most to make sense of this history and my place in it and what to do about it. I did weave them through the book. So with all of that, I'd like to read to you from one last place, and then I think we'll have some time for your questions. Thanks so much. So this is from towards the end of the book. One day, one last thing I gotta say. So even though I told you in 1908 that by 1908, the Lakota are living on just 2% of the land that they had reserved would be theirs forever from those original treaties that's less than 60 years earlier. It's not like in 1908, the United States stops trying to take native land. And you could argue that that effort is actually ongoing. And when Doug Whitebull was a child in the 1950s, growing up on the banks of the Missouri River on the Standing Rock Reservation, the United States set a series of dams for flood control on the Missouri. And though these were very effective at protecting cities downstream, they flooded a number of communities. And the communities that bore the brunt of that flooding were all Native, or the vast majority of them were Native. And hundreds of Native Americans had to move away from their homes and move farther away from the river, interior, to land that I found in a congressional report. One person said in a federal hearing, where we live now is so dry that even the jackrabbit carries a lunchbox when he comes to visit. So one day, Doug and I went back to visit what was left of the land where he grew up. And I'm going to read to you from that section. One day, Doug, myself, and one of Doug's former students drive out to visit what's left of the place where Doug grew up on the edge of the Missouri River. There aren't any roads to get there. Up and down, over buttes, we off-road in an old minivan. As we near the cut bank far above the deep blue water, red chokecherries and wild plum cluster in the folds and creases of the land. When we reach the grassy slope where Doug used to run barefoot with his sisters, I ask him how it feels. Feels great, feels like home, he says, closing his eyes under the bright sun. Swallows swoop through the sky. The air is filled with birdsong and the buzz of insects and the river and the wind. But for the moment, I'm not noticing any of that. I'm distracted by our effort to touch the past. An old cemetery fenced off and thick with chokecherry has survived the flood. While it had been slated for removal, the water never got that high, and the feds, by neglect or delay, left it alone. Deep inside the thicket of wild plants are gravestones of Doug's relatives, and he is determined to visit. Getting there will require this blind old man who relies on his cane as if it were a third limb to do the equivalent of bushwhacking. I explained to Doug where to put his foot, how to hold on to my arm and Jeff's arm. I'm embarrassed to share this part, but it's what happened. On the audio file, you can hear my voice asking if this is a good idea, cautioning Doug to be careful. Jeff quietly helps Doug step over the wire fence, gets a camp chair out of the van, and sets it up in the shade in case Doug needs a break. I should have known better. By this point, I knew a lot of Doug's stories, especially his greatest hits, such as the time he, as a teenager, ran a 50-mile race, finishing with bloody feet. I knew about his time at boarding school, where he was repeatedly hit and kicked by his teachers, sometimes with a wooden board across his bottom for the crime of not making his bed correctly. I knew he'd survived all that and become a straight A student. Not a person given to giving up, Doug slowly but steadily traverses the weedy expanse from the van to the graves deep in the middle of the cemetery. He never slows down, never complains. Standing as close as we can get to the old stones, the words in the marble etched in Lakota, I read the inscription aloud to Doug, and he translates. Here was Mary Whitebull, who died May 18th, 1902, at the age of 4. The shade of the chokecherry makes patches across our faces. As Doug takes a moment to contemplate the graves, I'm struck again by the weight of his loss. There's a debate described in the Talmud between two rabbis over what should be done if it's discovered that a house or even a palace was built using a stolen beam as part of its foundation. One rabbi says the entire building must be demolished so that the beam can be returned to its original owners. The other rabbi says the building can remain standing if its full value of the beam is repaid. Both rabbis make clear, as soon as it was known that the beam was stolen, those living in the house must do something. They must make amends. Our country was built on stolen beam, Rabbi Sharon Brous of Los Angeles famously said in a 2017 sermon. To ignore this history and the legacy of this history diminishes the legitimacy and the power of this house, of this nation. The money that has come to the Lakota was arguably never a fair trade for what was taken, rarely a deal negotiated without some degree of coercion. And the losses compound one another. The flooding of Doug's childhood home, built on the taking of his father's land and his grandfather's before that. And what of everything else that was stolen? The years Doug spent in fear at boarding school, the state-mandated destruction of Lakota language, religion, and culture. What payment can be made to replace such a loss? So, Peter or someone is going to deliver the questions to me, and we have about 5 minutes. So,
Okay, well, you very quickly, you wanted me to remind you of some updated information regarding since your book came out.
It's just that the book has, I'm very grateful that the book was named a best book of 2023 by Kirkus Reviews and by the Jewish Forward, and also the Jewish Tribal College, the Tribal College Journal and Christian Science Monitor. And it's been shortlisted for a bunch of awards, and it just won the Will Rogers Medallion Award for Western nonfiction. So
Congratulations, milestone. I'll just kick off the question, then we'll go around. Raise your hand or go in the chat. Kathy, help me out if I miss somebody. But real quick, Rebecca, in light of upcoming week from tonight, Thanksgiving, what's a takeaway to learn from your family story, the government's, as we approach Thanksgiving? Is there I assume, lessons to be learned here?
I think there's so many lessons to be learned, and you'll have to excuse me. I've had a terrible virus all week.
Don't worry, we'll take that out in editing.
We have a tradition that tells us that if we want to repair, we can't really do that repentance until we tell the truth, and we tell that truth out loud. And I think in general, we don't tell the truth in our country about a lot of things, but especially about the history of the taking of Native land and the treatment of Native America. And that's changing. There are not a lot, but there are some states that are now requiring the teaching of the Native nations, about the Native nations, about those treaties of their states. Oregon, where I live, is one of those. But in general, I think we have a long way to go. And so I think Thanksgiving is a wonderful holiday to consider as an opportunity to learn something about the Native nations that used to, and maybe still do, live on the land where you live now. And in the back of my book, and also available for free on my website, I have a resources for further research page to help people try and find themselves in this history and start to do some of that research themselves.
Great, thank you. Okay, as Carol Burnett used to say, let's bump up the lights, get some questions going. Faith? And try to keep you're muted, but try to keep your questions brief because Rebecca is limited on time.
Right. Just hello from Bismarck, North Dakota. I moved here from New York, and I've met Lakota people here and such. And but I'd rather leave to other questions, but I just had to say hello.
Hey, thank you. Anybody else? Raise your hand, put the hand symbol, or just at this point, just pop in because I still have backup questions. So I'll still keep on feeding. Kathy, do you see anybody who wants to say something?
No, but I have a question.
Great.
What was the emotional experience doing all of this research and writing the book? That must have been, pretty heavy.
It was so heavy. It was both grief and joy. And I think, again, we have a tradition that tells us those things so often go together in a beautiful way. I think there's this wonderful Dakota elder who talks about when Jewish people when Native and non-Native people study this history together, she said, for Native people, it's healing. And for non-Native people, it's freedom from denial. And I found that even in just the research of my own family's history, that we always had these stories that made our relatives sound like they were so good and so tough and so plucky. They always looked so good in their posed photographs. And it was, as one cousin said, it was very humanizing to know these stories about them. It was painful to see them as real people instead of these more two-dimensional heroes. And I think it's brought great compassion, not just to me, but to so many of my relatives have told me, even though it's been difficult to see this much more complicated story, it allows us to see ourselves with a bit more kindness, to not think, oh, they were so good before and now we're so bad. Like, there's always been Mishigas and there's always been strength, and we're just humans. We're going to screw up, and how do we move on from here? So.
Rebecca, is there a picture from the book that's maybe your favorite, or something that will give everyone a nice insight that we know we
I can try and share.
I find it fascinating, the pile of buffalo bones, but that's a whole nother story in your book.
Yeah, we don't really have time, but that's a photo I really love. That's of the shtetl in Kapulia, where my family lived, and those are my relatives in front of it. This one I love. These are my relatives in their white dresses on the ranch. And it's just amazing to me, how did they keep their clothes so clean? Anyway, I think I have time for maybe one last question. I'll leave it at that. And
okay, anybody have a final question? Rabbi Frank, do you have something? Because I'm sure you have insight.
You're muted.
Yeah, I'm as the rabbi, I'm thinking, how did your family maintain the Jewish sense of their culture, and how did they transmit that to the generations? I mean, you had a community, you had a synagogue. I mean, how did that work?
Great question. So my family didn't go to this area in South Dakota alone. There were actually about 70 Jews who all together from Sioux City, they all spoke Yiddish. They were all from the same part of the Pale of Settlement, and they all settled together it was non-contiguous homesteads, but they were close enough. And my great-grandfather's brother had attended yeshiva, and in Shlutsk, the Shlutsk yeshiva, and he could kosher meat. And they had a Torah, supposedly, and they would have services. They would do Shabbat. And when my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother and her brothers were in the Black Hills, they started the first Jewish community in the Dakotas. There was a synagogue there, and they would have services. And I found old newspapers clippings about it. And so it was so interesting, honestly, because on the one hand, they are desperate not to be exiled now that they're in America, and they are working to drop their accents, and they are impressing upon their children that they should be very successful in business, and they're impressing upon their daughters that they should look very white so that they can marry people who are very good in business. And I think that's all about, how do you stay safe in a new land? And at the same time, it was very important to them to really stay Jewish, and they really passed that on. I can't think of a single person in my family who hasn't had a B'nai Mitzvah. My son just had his 2 weeks ago. And so they were holding both in different pockets, I think. Yeah.
Rebecca, I know you're pressed for time, but I want to thank you and apologize to Anshuldik Mir on behalf, and thank you on behalf of City Congregation for joining us tonight. Just to let everyone know, if you look in the chat, the availability to the book, it's all major outlets. And I hope great further success with your book, Rebecca. I'm going to reread it again, take more notes, and maybe bring it up my Thanksgiving dinner if everyone will allow me to speak on it.
I love that. Also, I will be at the New York Jewish Book Festival. It's at the Jewish Heritage Museum in Manhattan.
That's correction. I used to work there. It's a Museum of Jewish Heritage in Battery Park City. I worked for 17 years.
Oh,
so
my goodness.
Yeah, I can give you the whole McGill on it. Unfortunately, they don't have a shop, which I ran at one time. But anyway, so if you see Rebecca at the Jewish Book Festival, say that your city congregation, you'll get a Laurel and Hardy handshake.
That's
Rebecca, what are the dates that you'll be there?
I'll be there December 8th, and I'm speaking at 11:30 in the morning, and I'll be signing books afterward. If anyone knows the television show Reservation Dogs, it's a fantastic show, and one of the actors from that show and I will be in conversation as part of the event. So, her name's
Okay.
Sarah
So
Podolsky.
much.
Kathy,
Yeah.
let's try to post that if we can somewhere. Again, Rebecca, thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Good Shabbos. Have a great
Shabbat
meeting.
shalom.